Another reality map video, volume 4, I believe. Alright, and so, yeah, it kind of turned into a flow chart. So this isn't, yeah, so, yeah, this isn't the refinement yet. I'm still just going through the, let's get to what the mechanism is and understand the components. And so the real value, I think, of the most recent observations that have come to me is that logic is just a simple process. Logic is, pointing at it, is just putting things in consistent category placement. So it's just about putting things in the right categories. So reality starts off with things that are in reality that you can identify, things separated by some sort of distance, some sort of separation, some sort of recognizable distinction. It looks different, it acts different, it functions different, it does something to give it differentness. And then you just say, what are the properties of that thing? Where did it come from? What's its origins? What's its functions? And so the properties would be one thing you have to accurately identify, these material properties. And then basically logic is just putting things in like categories. So you just take things with the same properties and put them in categories describing that property. So reasonable belief could be a category, and if you put religion in that category, you make a huge mistake. That's a logical error, because the finer definition of reasonable belief could be belief based on evidence, reliable evidence, not the evidence of witness testimony, which is unreliable evidence. But yeah, so it's just you make these categories, and these categories end up just being new properties. So these are the kind of abstract categories that you create. So these would be abstract categories, could contain things like value and other qualifiers, other descriptions of non-material aspects of something's existence. So yeah, so in the end though, it's still all properties. So categories are just a recognition of the fact that there is something distinctive that can be identified and separated out. Things can be placed in that grouping, and then that grouping, being a member of that group, ends up being one of your properties. So if I join a group of efilists, in a sense, it's an acknowledgement of the fact that I have the same properties as efilist. That's why I joined. But now the fact that I'm part of the group called efilist is a property that I now possess. Now I'm part of that group also. So that's a new added property that I possess. And all it really is, though, is a category created. So anyway, that's the simplicity of it. That's logic, that's reason, that's rationality. That's how you think properly, is understanding this idea of accurately defining something's properties, its origin, its function, its behavior, its nature, and categorizing things of like property. And that's really all it is. That's all thinking is. So anyway, so we start off with our properties. Let's just cut to the chase. That, yeah, we know there's lots of matter that has properties, space, lots of shit going on, and there's this very tiny amount of matter in the universe that's doing this brain thing. This living thing. Living first, and then brain thing. So we can understand that, let's just say, for the sake of this diagram, we have enough evidence to draw these as conclusions that this is, our origin is evolution. It's a DNA survival mechanism. It creates tools, and that one of the tools for us is this brain, and this brain does things like feeling and thinking and creates action in the world. And the feeling and the thinking thing feed back on each other. Thoughts create feelings, feelings create or inspire thoughts. Again, it's categorization. When you have a creepy feeling, you start thinking about creepy events, and vice versa. If you start thinking about creepy events, then you might end up giving yourself a creepy feeling. So it starts with this idea of senses that are the tools. They reach into the world in a sense, but what they're really doing is being like a keyboard or a mouse or the screen on a computer. They're input devices. Input comes in. The screen would be an output device for the computer, but for us it's an input device. And so you have these input senses, and then you have this brain that filters that material and puts it into categories. It wants to identify whether it should be afraid, or whether it should get hungry, or whether it should get horny. It decides what to do based on what input is coming in. And the nature of its own pre-established attitude. Okay, so its attitude is where its software has left you at the moment, what your condition is. You might be anxious or irritated or frustrated. You might have a headache. These things will decide when the input comes in how you're going to react to it. So there's no knee-jerk here, in the sense that it's all little knee-jerks, but there's a million of them. And so it's just this complex cascade of pre-ordered switching devices that will put you in a disposition. You have the mousetrap is set to a certain sensitivity. Certain input comes in, it hits that trap, flips that trap, then you go on a new train of thought, or you go on a new train of feelings. And so the feeling thing is basically doing this desire hunger thing. So that's the big one of the feeling thing. I mean, we're attempting to achieve this comfort. We want the comfort. The comfort is desirable, so that's part of the desire. We have kind of a hunger for comfort. And desire is just acknowledgement that we're not quite there, that we need something to satisfy ourselves. That's what the hunger mechanism basically is a irritation, a twist, a compression of your comfort. It compresses your comfort, and it implies to you that there needs to be something done. And if you don't do something, it squeezes your comfort a little harder and a little harder and a little harder, until you do what needs to get done. You know, whatever, eat or wank wank. But it'll force you to do something eventually, because the sensations will get strong enough that you won't be distractible, and it's going to require you to devote more of your attention to satisfying this need. Now, inside of that, so you have food and sex, the basic hard, hard desires, and then we have this weird one called ego, this one of status and self-esteem and winning, feeling competent and comfortable with ourselves, and that's sort of a thing that we build out of culture and social interaction. We kind of have to get that feedback that'll define that for us, in terms of these sense of accomplishment, sense of fulfillment, status. I'm winning feeling. I'm doing good. Things are okay, because you're on a road that you see as being, the road to success. You're going to be the alpha. You're in control. And the real thing, I guess I would argue, that for intelligent people, people that are doing more of this thinking thing, they've sort of tied this accomplishment thing to an idea of not being a fool. The real thing my ego wants for me is not to be an asshole, not to be a fool, not to be a sucker, not to be a dupe, not to be these things that are tied to getting it wrong, doing it wrong, being inefficient. These are all negative kind of conditions, and I want to be a positive one. I want to be to be alpha. I have to be accurate. I have to win the argument. I have to, do it the right way. These words like right and correct and honest and decent and all these kind of words are all tied to these aspects of what gives something credibility. And when you really condense it down, it all just means don't be a fool, don't be an asshole. Don't be an idiot. So it's all kind of driving towards some sort of quality of your strength, the integrity of your battle gear, in terms of fighting for your ideas, or fighting for your beliefs, or fighting for your identity, your place in the world, the way you're interacting. So it's an idea where you want to be able to defend your life. You want to be able to say, this is why I am a winner and not a loser. And it's that kind of but that's all ego driven. So our accomplishments can be abstract to our personal interest, because the accomplishment sort of is we tie our ego like an athlete ties their ego to how high the pole vault bar is and whether they can get over it. We tie our ego, an intellectual might tie their ego, to how many books they've read and how much knowledge they've absorbed and how well they've researched the subject and how competently they can argue the subject and how good their rhetoric is. All of these aspects of accomplishment become the standard by which they judge whether they're ready for the Olympics, whether they're potentially the champion. And that's the ego. So the ego is displaced, the simpler accomplishments like I'm going to get me some, with something a little more complicated, like you have to do a little better than just satisfying your needs to be called a winner. Being a winner requires some other accomplishment, and that's a cultural instrument, but it's also just an instrument that intelligence is going to gravitate to. It's automatically going to say, I want a better game than tic-tac-toe. Once it masters tic-tac-toe, it wants a better game. And once you've mastered figuring out how to eat, and understanding a little bit about your sex drive, you're going to look for something a little more complicated, a better game to play, a challenging game. And that's just an instrument of intelligence. Intelligence is going to force you to migrate to a game that has real challenges. It's probably something that's just basic to brain function, that it's going to strive to keep improving. It's not going to strive to be sedentary, to just acquiesce to not take on the challenge, I guess, to be totally intimidated by some sort of fear of the contest. It kind of is hungry for the contest. It's hungry for the competition. It's hungry to be retested. It wants to push boundaries. It has a nature. It's sort of built into our psychology. So I'd say the ego has that sort of built into it, that the ego can be very aggressive. Once it takes a little bit of ground, it wants all the ground. Kind of thing. Alright, so there's lots of little bubbles I put here, that the brain is basically you're trying to accurately describe reality, and that really turns into describe and model end up being the same thing. So you're really just trying to accurately model reality. That's why it's a reality map. You're just trying to conform a mental construct that establishes the properties and the categories correctly. And I put a little thing of honesty here trailing up in here, just because honesty was just occurred to me that there's certain disciplines that are going to be part of that are kind of automatic, and I guess it was sort of an opposite reaction to the dishonesty. You could argue that a lot of religious people don't really believe in their religion, but they think it makes people good people. So they think that dishonesty is valid because it has a positive consequence. But this is again a misidentification of categories, because we know that most of the time, almost all of the time, dishonesty will not produce a good end result. That creating any errors are going to, in some way or another, hurt you in the end. And so you want to do this math as error-proof as possible. You never want to inject errors, without there being some sort of absolute necessity. And there is no absolute necessity. We know that good peopleness doesn't require any silly religion, and that most of the silly religions create a lot more bad people than they do good people. And the badness of the bad people is so outrageously bad, that it's really not worth it, clearly. So anyway, so we're back to this words like achievement and accomplishment and status and good and productive and quality and win and being better than. But it all comes down to just being being unfoolish. That's what you want to be, is unfoolish. So it's being right, being intelligent, good logic, wisdom. These are all the positive things that become part of this ego-established mechanism. So you gain a self-interest in these abstract definitions of something being valuable. So you end up being hungry for the truth, hungry for integrity, hungry for rightness and logic and wisdom, all these things that you declare to be positives. Your brain figures these things out. They establish the category. Honesty is a good category. Evidence is a good category. Facts is a good category. Integrity is a good category. Quality is and then productive is a really good category. So you want to be able to slide your brain into this it does productive thinking category. So you want to be a good thinker, an honest thinker, a thinker who thinks in the longest term, not the shortest term, because logic says, yes, the long term is bigger than the short term, and you can't gain any net equation result from a short-term result, so short-term results are pretty much irrelevant. Yeah, but that's the game. And so we're just really talking about what this human animal is. And again, so it will come down to the fact that we are these two things. We're this internal sensitive organism that needs care, and then we're an actor in this environment full of other sensitive organisms that need care. So, as much as we'd like to think, all we have to do is take care of this, the fact is we do have elbows, and we are poking things of equal value to ourselves. And so to gain our positive, we can be doing something extremely negative to something of equal integrity to ourselves, which balances into a zero. So if you're affecting the world in some negative way, or in some way where you're not correcting for its brokennesses, or its headache, or its weaknesses, and you're totally focused on your own liabilities and weaknesses and flaws, then you're not likely to be productive, because you're probably going to be affecting the world in some negative way, or you're probably not reaching full potential because you're leaving a whole bunch of fixing off the table because you're obsessing about one individual broken thing, rather than recognizing that there's easy to fix things in this outside world that would be much more economical in terms of your efforts. You can gain a lot more fixing by applying your energy to that external world than applying your energy to this internal world. And that's just one of the dilemmas of existing as an intelligence in a world full of broken. It just kind of sucks that it's this huge burden that you have to basically run your tires down and let your machine fail and deteriorate, because the fact is it's better to use the wax and the oil and the grease and the materials on all these other things that are in so much worse shape and need it urgently, and where a little bit goes a long way, where you're kind of a hard to polish thing, you're a little bit needy, you're too high maintenance, I guess is the word. So you'd have to recognize that there are some organisms, some internal mechanisms that are incredibly high maintenance. They need thousands of dollars a day not to cry. If you don't give them thousands of dollars worth of care and feeding per day, in terms of having dust-free environments and shiny marble and all this other bullshit, if you take away their pretty little pampered world, they'll cry. They'll be all upset. They won't be able to deal with reality anymore. So they're super high maintenance, and you could take the same resources that it requires to stop them from crying and give it to 500 people that are crying right now, and they would stop crying. So it's just a logical equation. It's just perfectly sensible and logical to recognize there's more productivity in taking the resources and applying them outward than applying them inward. And that's the burden of being human, is especially a human living with knowledge of the simple math. And so you're stuck with it, and you're stuck with now it obligates you. That's the obligations of intelligence. And yeah, it sucks. Anyway, that's probably enough. So anyway, yeah, you've got to tighten it all up, but it's, this is pretty simple. Our brain is just an arranger, a filter, and you either filter within these rational guidelines, these logical guidelines, where like things are in like categories, or you don't. You either do it right or you do it wrong. And if you filter it right, you come up with the answer that, it's just a molecule replicating, and it's just doing it for no reason but because the chemistry commanded it, and it could. And yeah, there's nothing for it to accomplish, and there's no reason to sustain it, especially when the only way we have functionality, our brain has purpose, is to first create something broken. I mean, that's another key ingredient to this, is the understanding that intelligence has no function outside of something that needs. If there isn't something that needs, intelligence doesn't have anything to do. It just couldn't care less. There's nothing to motivate it. There's nothing to propel it but some sort of nonsense, some sort of abstract dictate that would have no credibility. It could just, you could order the computer to go, but the computer's not going to find a reason beyond your order. And so, yeah, we can order ourselves to be, but that doesn't mean that we have a purpose or a function. That doesn't mean that we're being productive. Because really the real truth is you have to break it before you can have a function or a purpose. And the only thing that really gives us purpose is the fact that, yes, all these abstract ideas and this idea of accomplishment is related to the fact that there's need in the world and it needs to be resolved. And that's it. That's what gives us that extra game to play. But the truth is that game is very expensive and it's entirely unnecessary. And so it is in itself unproductive. It can't be productive. It can never be productive to break something and then fix it. That can never be anything but zero-sum stupid. And it has every potential that you won't be able to fix it well enough. And that just means it's going to be unproductive, because your fix won't be as good as the original unbroken. Yeah, now it's enough. Alright, till next time and such.